But yeah, I mean, the big challenge of all of this is, to get people on it en masse, deliver them something useful, give them a reason for doing it in the first place, and then sort of keep them using it and get bootstrapping an ecosystem. I think that it requires different tactics, and different technology, different kind of approaches. The narrative that we've all been told in crypto, right, is that, starting with Bitcoin, and I believe this myself because, I came into this through Bitcoin. Bitcoin brought me in. That, traditional fiat money, like the dollar or the pound, isn't backed by anything. There's just a government with a printing press, right? And that it's all gone to hell since the gold standard disappeared, because it used to be a gold in a vault backing the money, right? And Bitcoin, on the other hand, is backed by this 21 million guarantee there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. But when you look into it and you really understand how things work, you realize that's not really a fair claim. So all cryptocurrencies work on the idea of constrained supply, right? If you constrain supply, either fixing it in the manner of Bitcoin or having tapering inflation in the manner of Ethereum, then in this case, if the supply is constrained and demand goes up, the price also has to go up, right? Simple economics. And, the dream with Bitcoin, I suppose, was that, through the kind of pyramid effect, people would be sucked in. And then eventually the claim was that, I remember this guy, Jean-Pierre, telling me how Bitcoin would be like a supermassive black sun, right, that sucks in all the money. It'll be worth $1 trillion. And at this point, it'll be so big it's stable. And the other claims, of course, are that, things like hedging and futures markets will stabilize the price of Bitcoin. So the reality is, as we've seen, actually, that these futures markets and margin facilities and so on actually don't stabilize cryptocurrencies at all. They actually make them more volatile, firstly. And secondly, so that idea is completely false. And the idea that when it becomes, or if it becomes, Bitcoin becomes like a supermassive black sun worth $1 trillion, it'll be stable because of its scale, is also false. Firstly, because it will present an even bigger target for speculators, and secondly, because people are buying in because the price goes up. People buy it because the price goes up, right? And they think it's an investment opportunity, and that holds true for all cryptocurrencies. The problem is that if it ever did become a supermassive black sun, everybody who bought Bitcoin because they thought the price was going up would say, hey, it's got so big, the price has stopped going up, I'm going to sell. And the moment they start selling and the price starts going down, then everybody who bought Bitcoin because they thought the price was going to go up also starts selling, and then you have a crash. And that's kind of what you're seeing at the moment. It progresses through a series of bubbles. Now, it's quite possible that through those series of bubbles, the price, the value, and the cap of Bitcoin can become very large. However, at the point at which you have different kinds of crypto system that provide crypto fiat, stable tokens that are backed by something, not some crazy constrained supply and demand and so on, and people start using those for actual decentralized financial applications, right? People will realize that these kind of speculation coins, if you like, don't really have that much practical value other than you can hold them, and if everyone believes the value is going to go up too, then you're going to make money, right? And at that point, of course, they'll begin to devalue in a long bear market, and people will instead invest in the tokens, the voting tokens, the back systems that provide things like crypto fiat, right? And then those voting tokens will, of course, be very volatile in the manner of today's cryptocurrencies. But the valuations will be justified on the basis that they're going to get a share of the revenues from these systems that are actually used. That's the difference. I think there's a very big problem with this kind of business of just constraining demand and constraining supply, and hoping that demand will inflate it, because you're never going to get a stable token. And money, remember, is three things: unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value, right? Unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value. You cannot do unit of account and medium of exchange successfully if your value isn't stable. All you can really do with cryptocurrencies today is use them as a speculative store of value, and that's very, very different from money. And the word cryptocurrency is misleading because they're not really currency at all, right? And people, often quite high, right? This Austrian sort of economist And he wrote a book on the denationalization of money. And he proposed that we have lots of competing currencies, all good, and that he wrote it in the 70s, that tills be, his mechanical tills be re-engineered so you could turn a dial and select the currency, and these things would compete, and the government would give up its monopoly on producing money. But he said very specifically that he believed in this kind of environment the most stable currencies would always win. Without getting into economic theory, having unstable currencies is extremely bad for the economy because the pricing signals go haywire. Well, if you sort of look at an economy from a sort of computer science perspective, you might imagine lots of different nodes in the economy who are people, consumers or suppliers of goods and services, and you can imagine edges on the graph between them, right, that represents supply relationships, and these things are sending signals with respect to demand and the value of these products and services, right? And, if we have a unit of account that has a constant value, right, you can imagine that this graph might reach a kind of equilibrium. And that's, fundamentally how capitalism works and why it's very good at producing efficient markets and cheap products and services. Right? But if, instead, as some people dream about, we replaced, today's fiat with cryptocurrency, and all these signals were going haywire, it's pretty obvious that this kind of insane graph and the movements of products and services and the pricing and so on would just not reach any kind of equilibrium. It'd be a catastrophe, and the economy would go into meltdown. We have to have kind of fiat-like currencies to run an economy, okay? Okay, so this is an important point. So, we discussed what cryptocurrency is and how it works by constraining supply, and therefore demand sends the price up, right? So the myth that exists in the cryptocurrency space is that the government is there, sitting there completely out of control with the central banks, cranking out the printing presses to create fiat money. And therefore fiat money is not backed by anything. We left Bretton Woods or whatever it was, and it's no longer backed by gold, right? And it's just this rubbish that you can throw away, right, and burn because it's just paper, whatever, right? Okay. This is a complete fucking lie, right, that's peddled in the cryptocurrency industry. It's not how it works at all. 98% of fiat money is created in a modern economy by commercial banks. And they create the money when they issue loans. So if you go into a bank and say, I want $100,000, they don't take that money from savers and depositors because there are far fewer of those than borrowers, right? You want Arthur, you want $100,000? Let me see your assets and your earning record and all the rest of it. I'll decide if you're good for the money, and you can give a personal guarantee, or if you buy a house, I'll secure it on the house, or if you're buying a car, maybe I'll secure it on the car and so on. And I'm just going to create the $100,000. This is how commercial banking works. I just create the $100,000 out of thin air. That's a special privilege granted to me by the government. On my balance sheet, the $100,000 becomes a liability, and that loan to you, the $100,000 loan I issued to you, becomes an asset. Now, let's say you're meant to pay back $110,000 because there's interest. Let's say there's 10% interest compound, whatever, right? And you're going to pay back $11,000 a month. That's the agreement, right? And after 10 months, say, it's paid back. The asset, therefore, is ostensibly $110,000 because you've got to pay me back $110,000. I've got a liability of $100,000 because I created $100,000, and that's the rules by which the commercial banks have to play. Now, I can't book your loan as a $110,000 asset because there's a chance that you're going to run off to New Zealand and not pay it, whatever, right? Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, there's some credit default risk here. I'm going to book Arthur's loan at like $105,000. At the end of the year, right, I've got an asset worth $105,000. I've got a liability of $100,000. I've made $5,000 to profit. And obviously if I do that over and over again, I give out loads of loans, right? I'm going to make lots of money, and then I can go and buy, if I'm a senior banker, I can go and buy my place in the Hamptons, right? And if I've done this by, and of course it's much more complex because people like securitize debt and sell them on, but this is the fundamental dynamic, right? And, the problems come in, of course, where, you've got the banks going crazy in a bubble and just lending out money, for example, in to subprime borrowers. Like in the film The Big Short, you've got the stripper with 5 houses, all this kind of stuff, right? And then at some point it goes pop, and all the people involved in that whole kind of machine that gives out these loans unjudiciously and unwisely, they've already cashed out and got the place in the Hamptons. And then, it goes crash, and actually it turns out that these loans on the bank's balance sheet may be only worth, your loan is only worth, given your high credit default risk offer is obviously only worth $50,000, and I've got a liability of $100,000 because that's how much money I created, right? And now, the government, all the banks are going to collapse unless the government comes in and buys these debts, right? And that was the financial crisis. But, ignoring the flaws in the existing banking system, which is a huge problem for society, right? Ignoring the flaws, the system is also responsible for the growth and wealth that we've all experienced over the last 100 years. It was responsible even for things like, indirectly for things like the Industrial Revolution. If you go to Shanghai and you go drinking on the Bund in Bar Rouge and you look out across all those amazing skyscrapers and the lights, which were paddy fields 25 years ago, this is the mechanism that made that possible. So you can reduce it, atomize it. You can imagine, a country with only one person in it, and that country has a bank somehow, right? And it also has this one person has a horse, right? And next door, there's lots of people who want taxi rides. So he goes to the bank and he says, look, I need to borrow money for a cart so I can get taxi rides. And the bank says, well, okay, we'll lend you money for the cart secured upon your horse, right? The guy gets the loan, new money is issued against his horse that enables him to buy the cart, that enables him to provide taxi rides, pay off his loan, buy something else, and grow the economy. It's an incredibly powerful mechanism. He's made his horse liquid, but retained control of his horse, and being able to buy this car that enables him to give taxi rides, and then he earns more money and spends it. So the mechanism itself is extremely powerful and is responsible for nearly all of the growth that we see in modern economies. The problem is that there have been various things that are beginning to subvert that mechanism, right? And it's always been problematic, actually, right? But we saw this in the 2008 financial crisis, right? Banks were giving out loans they shouldn't have. The banks then operate in this greed-fear cycle, right? When things are going well, they'll pump money into bubbles, and it means they can make huge profits. But when things are going badly, the money just dries up, and businesses and individuals that should be able to borrow money for worthy reasons are unable to access credit, right? And this, of course, exacerbates something called the credit cycle, which is very damaging to the economy, right? Reduces economic growth, makes the economy less efficient, creates all kinds of problems. I mean, you can really fairly trace back Donald Trump to the financial crisis. A lot of people got hurt, right? And they know that it's unfair that these bankers were fixing the credit rating agencies and saying that CDSs were sound, and everyone knew it was a great big Ponzi, and they were happily buying, more mansions in the Hamptons, right? And then the average guy, the average Joe, ends up carrying the can and being made much poorer. And this leads to anger and leads to political problems, and you don't even know where that'll end, right? So the banks now, today, because of the way it's set up, the way they can securitize loans, the way the incentive system works, very dangerous for the global economy and society generally. They can, when you create huge depressions, it can lead to war, as we saw in the 1930s, right? Now we've got a kind of slightly maniacal president in the US who might, play fast and loose with Kim Jong-un, who's a lunatic, and, you might have a maniac and a moron and, end up with nuclear war or something, right? So the consequences from these banking actions are very severe. You also have a problem where money is increasingly digitized, so that if you can't pay for something with a credit card or a debit card, you're pretty much locked out of society. I've got friends who live on Bitcoin entirely, and you can buy flights with cheapair or .com or whatever, but it's frigging difficult, right? And the banks actually are taking it upon themselves to decide who is a good and a bad guy. They started doing this thing called Operation Choke Point in the US, and it started off with payday lenders, moved on to adult film industry participants, which is very bad. Yeah, I mean, if you're like there are these young girls who are already perhaps in a slightly exploitative industry, and now they discover that their bank accounts are closed down and they have to live on using cash, right? And they've got people offering them drugs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, how does that helping them, right? And then, of course, they moved on to crypto. So I've had a bank account closed down only for the reason that I'm a crypto guy, right? By Chase. So, there's a major civil liberties issue with fiat money really only being accessible through banking services, which can be switched off. So, you add all that up together, and it's clear commercial banks present a major problem. They fuck with the economy in ways that can have very far-reaching implications politically, as well as in relation to sort of hardships that are put on people. Very grave civil liberties danger. And on top of that, just objectively, if you stand back, you can see in Palo Alto, I don't know how many, there must be hundreds of branches in the valley because there's a lot of people with money. Hundreds of bank branches, incredibly expensive real estate, banks packed with service counters, right? And then, that's only the bit that you see. It's almost the tip of the iceberg. Above that, you've got compliance and expensive executives, right? This is an extremely expensive industry. And the reality is that we all pay for that expense, right? I mean, some estimates put financial services at like 6-7% of GDP. It could be higher. And it's also unfairly exercised against people who, for example, miss a repayment and get into financial trouble at the bottom, who then end up getting endless letters and things like that, which are designed specifically to constantly trip them into overdraft so they can send more letters and just exploit them. So the banking industry, the commercial banking industry all around is a very foul thing. It's bad for the economy, it's bad for civil liberties, it's bad politically, it's bad for just all of us generally because it's so fucking expensive, we all have to pay for it.
But it enables us to build Shanghai.
Yeah, well, the mechanism has done, but it's changing, and it's still an important mechanism. It's not, but we shouldn't thank the banks for that. Those are just the guys who've been given guardianship of this mechanism by government, right? It's the mechanism that creates the growth, not the banks. We want to keep the mechanism in place and get rid of the banks, right? And there are lots of benefits to society that can flow from this. So the FI system, difficult, entirely to explain without diagrams and things like that. But essentially, I've been working on various stabilized token systems for about a year and a half, 2 years, which I wanted to run on top of Ethereum because Ethereum needs stable tokens. And the problem was there were always like failure modes. And then I was reading this book called Where Does Money Come From?, written by a bunch of Bank of England guys. And then it explained the money system. I'm like, oh my God, this is how it works. Okay. Well, if this is how it works, I can create a crypto analog to this system, and I can create crypto fiat. And essentially, you have a computer, an autonomous system, can run on Ethereum or Definity. And this thing loans in a kind of mirror currency. So, if you're in England, you're going to get a loan in FI GBP. If you're in America, you're going to loan in FI USD, right? In Hong Kong, FI HKD, right? In Switzerland, FI CHF. This thing's entirely autonomous, right? And people can join the system as validators. Of course, inspired by proof of stake, they have to put a deposit down. And the computer, the autonomous computer, plays puppet master, right? And it uses these validators to validate loans. And it does this by using random sequences of validators, with each validator not knowing who's next. And this was inspired by validation towers. It just came straight out of Definity, which is a mechanism we use to create scalable blockchain computer. It just got taken straight from that, without getting into how the market making works and why these things are pegged exactly. But let's say Alpha wants a loan, right? You come to me and I'm a validator. And I'll explain the consumer experience, which is very different in practice. This is just a theory. You come to me, you say you want a loan. If I'm convinced you're probably maybe good for it, I use an open source package to make your loan application. Everyone shares the same package. I fill in the data. I collect the information from you. It's probably a bit of subjective stuff. I put that in too. And then there's a policy of the FI system set by it, sort of probably like a governance nervous system, like there's a blockchain nervous system in Definity. And this will set, things like interest rates. And so, the package will grade your loan A to G, and on that basis, I'll be able to offer you certain repayment terms and certain interest rates. And if you accept, I then take this loan application and I take the hash of it and I tell the computer, hey, I want to propose a loan application and this is the hash. The computer says, right, okay, fair enough. But how do I know that this loan application is any good? Right, because I'm proposing it to the computer. Arthur might be your friend and he's giving you a kickback or something, whatever, right? He's just going to run off with the money and never repay it. Now there's reasons I'm on the hook. I've got a deposit, right? I made a deposit to the computer in order to do this, and I'm only, let's say I put in $50,000, I'm able to validate up to $500,000 worth of loans, but only in $5,000 loan sizes maximum. So anyway, the computer says, right, I'm going to randomly select another validator. Let's see, what the hell is your name?
Liesel.
Liesel, yeah. I'm gonna select Liesel, right? For the next validator, right? And can you please, Dominic, can you please encrypt the loan application to the public key of Liesel? Because obviously you don't want like your personally identifiable information leaking out, right? So I do that, and Liesel downloads it, and she looks at it. And if she approves it too, right, the process will be repeated until such time the computer is convinced. Now the thing is this, let's say I was your friend, okay, I can propose you to the computer, but I don't know that Liesel's going to be next. It's completely random, and the random selection happens after I've committed to the fact that I believe your loan application is good. And similarly, Liesel doesn't know who's next, right? Let's say, I propose it, Liesel disagrees and someone, whatever. What happens is it'll go to an appeal. And the appeal's done by another random chain of validators until such time it's resolved. And, my reputation will fall. Now, there's a problem with that. I'll explain the problem. Let's say there's 3 validators, right? This is how it works. That the loan will generate interest, right? We've said it's a $100,000 loan, you're going to pay back $110,000, there's $10,000 interest to be earned, right? This is going to be split 60% to me, because I did all the hard work creating the loan package, 20% to Liesel, and 20% to the next guy, right? Similarly, by the way, if you miss a loan repayment, it's going to be taken out of my deposit 60%, Liesel's 20%, the next guy 20%, right? So that's the game. If even in the loan application stage, it fails because I shouldn't have proposed your loan, it was unreasonable, or misrated it, or whatever I did, my reputation goes down, and now in the future, maybe, in fact, it's not just like 3 validators, it's 5 validators. And now, instead of getting 60% of the interest for doing all this hard work, it's going to be 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, right? So my profitability goes down. In fact, if my reputation falls enough, my deposit's going to get stuck, effectively, right? Because I'm not going to be able to get loans through. It's going to get harder and harder, right? As the computer ratchets up the scrutiny that's applied to every loan. It becomes more conservative. So anyways, the point is, let's say 3 of us, I'm going to get 60%, Liesel's going to get 20%, the next guy's going to get 20%. The computer says, right, this has convinced me, the validators have got good reputations, and I'm going to approve the loan. You get the 100,000 FiUSD. That $10,000 interest FiUSD is put in escrow, and it's going to be given upon successful repayment of your loan. That interest will be shared amongst the validators and other stakeholders. And you can see that why Fi now is called Fi golden ratio, right? Because the fiat money, if you like, that's involved is matched by Fi USD, right? You've got to pay back $110,000 FiUSD, which means you've got to buy $110,000 FiUSD on the exchanges in order to pay back the computer, right? So all of this money that's going to be paid back in fiat already exists in FiUSD, if you like. If you don't pay back the computer's got no, the computer's just this thing, an algorithm in cyberspace, right? It can't leave cyberspace. It has no physical manifestation. It has no legal standing whatsoever. It's just an algorithm in cyberspace. It can't come out of cyberspace and collect these debts, right? So if you stop paying it back, the computer just takes the missing amount. Let's say you miss a monthly repayment of $11,000. The computer just takes it out of my deposit, 60% from me, 20% from Liesel, and 20% from the next guy. Right? Now, for this reason, obviously, by the way, this is bad for us because our deposit's going down, and in addition to that, if we don't refill up, top up our deposit, our reputation goes down, and pretty much we're going to find the remainder of our deposit just locked in. We've got no way of progressing. Effectively, by you not paying the computer back, you've taken it from us. So when I said to you that I'd propose you to the computer for a loan, I made you sign a contract. And it said, hey, Arthur, look, I'm going to propose you to the computer for a loan, but if you don't pay back the computer's going to take the money from my deposit, and effectively I've got to top up my deposit to keep on operating and so on. I lose. And consequently, if you don't pay back the computer, the money that you didn't pay back the computer becomes immediately owing to me and immediately repayable. At which point, of course, if this happens, I just activate the contract and give it to a debt collection agency. But it's just a cost of doing business, right? I'm earning interest, and there's always going to be some bad loans. So the loan goes bad, I just sell this contract to a debt collection agency, and they either send bailiffs to your house or organise a repayment schedule or whatever it is. It's not my problem. It's just a cost of doing business. But the beautiful thing is that you can have unlimited thousands and thousands of validators, and the actual custodianship, if you like, of the assets is via these debt relationships, decentralized debt relationships that are legally enforceable via existing infrastructure. So if you think about what Fi is, it's just the same as fiat. Fiat is an aggregate IOU on borrowers' assets and personal guarantees, right? Houses, cash flows, personal guarantees, right? And Fi is exactly the same. Fi is an aggregate IOU on people that are borrowing money. Money's, assets and personal guarantees and so on. So, it's not like there's no stabilization mechanism as such, right? The system just relies upon loans being made rationally and judiciously, right? And the thing is that, we've had a lot of very talented economists looking at this, and the feedback and the conclusions are that Fi is much more rational, is a much more rational originator of loans than commercial banks are, because of the way the incentives are set up. So not only does it originate loans much more accurately and judiciously and responsibly, thus benefiting the economy by reducing the credit cycle and things like that, and being able to give out loans even in a down cycle, right? Because it doesn't have this greed fear thing which results from the broken incentive structure of commercial banks, but it also removes all these hideous costs that are burdening society, right? Which are manifested by all the bank branches that we see everywhere, right? So it really is a much superior alternative to commercial banking. And of course, the way this will be implemented in practice is that you'll have a modern banking experience where you'll have, a VR headset or a phone app that enables you to walk into a virtual bank branch. And unless it's a business loan, right, then you have to meet the guy in person. But typically for consumer loans, where things can be verified online and so on, and you'll go into this virtual bank branch on your phone. You may have to go to a different room, which is the second validator, and the third room, right? All that kind of stuff. But at the end of that, you'll get some loan ID, and you'll give that loan ID to some, exchange service, which exchanges Fi at a fixed rate, right? And then you'll just get the fiat out. You won't even have to touch Fi. And that's in the short term. It's just a better way of, for the average consumer to borrow money, right? And of course, behind the scenes, there's all kinds of people in crypto who want to have these secure tokens that are backed by assets, right? Which aren't centralized, right? Aren't backed by a bank or some company that could go run away the money or do whatever, or have their money seized, whatever bad shit can happen. So there's an almost unlimited demand for this crypto fiat today. This is what's holding back the crypto industry. At the moment, we have Fi crypto fiat, decentralized finance, all kinds of crazy applications that people can't even imagine today. So, the limit on it actually will be the speed at which people can borrow money. But, the consumer experience will be this virtual banking experience where they're able to borrow money at lower fees, lower interest rates, if they're good for the money, that is. And hopefully, businesses will be, if they're good for it, businesses will be able to access capital in down markets and things like that. So, the consumers and businesses will have immediately feel a huge benefit, right? And will immediately be addressing, civil liberties issues and things like that. But meanwhile, the crypto industry will be benefiting from this huge amount of crypto fiat that will be produced, right, which is secured against real world assets like houses, business cash flows, cars. Definity produces new maths, right, original new maths that makes the unbounded blockchain computer possible, which will have much better performance than we see today, right, 50x speed up on Ethereum today. But also, most importantly, like unbounded capacity is, you can add more and more miners, and the capacity just gets bigger and bigger, right? So, we can first of all, we address the need for, unbounded computation there in cyberspace. and that already has a lot of benefits with respect to enterprise IT and things like that. And then on top of that, we layer on crypto fiat, and now you can do anything. That's when you really start seeing a huge shift towards sort of decentralized society. But I think if you look at it, I mean, until such time there's some flaw in the mechanisms, we haven't covered obviously the full complexity of it. But Fi does at least seem, in first phase, to be a very good replacement for the commercial bank industry. And I think what's important is that there's never been a commercial banking startup, right? And there's all kinds of layers, and the fintech is complete nonsense. It's really just lipstick on the pig, basically, right? There's no serious startup banks competing with the monopoly, right? And the point is that there probably never will be. The competition comes from a new system that makes commercial banking obsolete, right? By giving out loans more judiciously, right, such that the economy benefits, by getting rid of the civil liberties dangers, right? By getting rid of all that inherent cost involved in, bank branches and all those people sitting behind those desks and the compliance and all the rest of it, right? Yeah, that's fine anyway.